The horse reared without warning, and Alina Hartley's heart jumped into her throat. She was walking along the narrow road outside Ashcombe village, a basket of eggs on her arm, when she saw the rider ahead losing control. His saddle had slipped sideways, and he was seconds away from being thrown hard onto the stony path. Alina dropped her basket and ran. "Stop, your saddle is loose," she shouted, waving both arms. The rider pulled hard on the reins, and the horse slowed just enough to keep its footing. He turned, breathing fast, his face pale with shock. Alina reached him moments later, already reaching for the girth strap without asking permission. She had grown up around horses her whole life, and her hands moved faster than her manners. "You could have broken your neck," she said, tightening the leather strap with practiced ease. "Whoever saddled this horse for you did a poor job." The man, still catching his breath, watched her work. He wore fine clothes, though plain compared to what most gentlemen wore, and he carried no servants, no carriage, nothing to suggest who he was. "I saddled it myself," he admitted, sounding almost embarrassed. Alina laughed before she could stop herself. "Then you should leave that job to someone who knows what they are doing." He smiled at that, more amused than offended. "You may be right. What is your name?" "Alina Hartley." "Edmund," he replied simply, offering nothing more. He did not mention a family name, and Alina did not ask. She assumed he was a traveler passing through, perhaps a merchant or a visiting cousin of one of the local families. He thanked her again, this time with real warmth, and swung back onto his horse, testing the saddle carefully before trusting his full weight to it. "I owe you a debt," he said. "You owe me nothing. Just check your own saddle next time," Alina answered, already turning to gather her scattered eggs from the road. Edmund watched her a moment longer as though memorizing her face, then rode off toward the hills beyond the village. Alina picked up what eggs had survived the fall and continued on her way home, already forgetting the stranger's name. Such things happened often enough on country roads. People needed help, she gave it, and life moved forward without ceremony. She did not think of him again that evening as she helped her father muck out the stables of the great house nearby, the largest estate in the county. She did not think of him the next morning either, as she brushed down the horses and fed them their morning oats. The stranger on the road was simply a stranger, one of many faces that passed through her small world and vanished again. She had no way of knowing that within days she would see that same face again, only this time surrounded by servants bowing so low their heads nearly touched the floor. A messenger arrived at the Hartley cottage before sunrise, banging on the door with such urgency that Alina's father nearly dropped his lantern. The great house needed her immediately. One of the finest horses on the estate had injured its leg overnight, and word had spread that Alina had a gift for calming frightened animals. She dressed quickly and followed the messenger up the long gravel drive toward the manor, her mind racing with worry for the horse rather than for herself. Inside the stable block, she found the injured animal trembling in its stall, sweat covering its neck. She moved toward it slowly, speaking in a low, steady voice, and the horse began to settle almost at once. It was only when she turned to ask for warm water and clean cloths that she saw him. He stood near the stall door, dressed now in a dark coat with a high collar, and every servant around him bowed their heads the moment he spoke. A steward addressed him with careful respect. "Your Grace, the healer says the leg will recover with proper care." Alina froze, the cloth still in her hand. "Your Grace." She looked again at the man's face, and there was no mistaking it. This was Edmund from the road, the man who had saddled his own horse and thanked her plainly for her warning. Except he was not simply Edmund. He was the Duke of Ashcombe, master of the very estate where her father had worked his whole life. Her stomach turned cold. She had shouted at him. She had scolded him for his poor saddling and laughed in his face. Now she stood in his stable, uncertain whether to bow, apologize, or simply disappear through the nearest door. The Duke's eyes found hers across the stable, and instead of anger, something like quiet delight crossed his face. He walked toward her while the steward and other staff watched in confusion. "Eleanor Hartley," he said, using her full name as though it pleased him to remember it. "I did not expect to find my rescuer treating my horses as well." "Your Grace, I did not know who you were," she said quickly, dropping into an awkward curtsy. "Forgive my manner on the road, had I known." "Had you known, you likely would have said nothing at all, and I might have broken my neck out of politeness," he interrupted, his tone light. "I prefer honesty to formality, Miss Hartley. Please, continue your work with my horse. I trust your hands more than anyone else's today." The stable staff exchanged glances, whispers already beginning to travel from one servant to the next. Eleanor returned to the injured horse, her cheeks burning, painfully aware that the Duke remained standing nearby, watching her work with quiet interest rather than leaving as any proper nobleman might have done. Over the following weeks, Eleanor returned to the great house every morning to continue the horse's recovery. She expected each visit to be brief, a simple check of the leg and fresh bandages, yet the Duke seemed to find reasons to appear in the stables whenever she was there. He asked about her methods, her years of experience, and whether she had learned everything from her father or discovered some of it herself through trial and error. "Both," she told him one morning, wrapping a fresh bandage around the horse's leg. "My father taught me patience. The horses taught me the rest." Edmund, as she still thought of him privately, leaned against the stall door with his arms crossed, watching her hands move with quiet skill. "Most people who speak to me choose their words carefully, hopping to please me. You speak as though you have forgotten I hold any authority at all. Would you prefer I flatter you instead, Your Grace?" "No," he said firmly, "I would not." Their conversations grew longer with each visit, stretching from horses to the running of the estate, and eventually to smaller things, the books she read by candlelight, the songs her mother used to sing before she passed, the quiet ambitions Eleanor rarely spoke of to anyone. The Duke listened as though her words carried real weight, something few people in her life had ever offered her. She began to notice small things about him too, the way he preferred walking to riding whenever possible, the patience he showed with the youngest stable boys, the tiredness behind his eyes when he thought no one was watching. He carried burdens far heavier than she had first realized, responsibilities toward tenants, family expectations, and an estate that depended on his every decision. The stable staff noticed the pattern long before Eleanor allowed herself to admit it. Whispers followed her now wherever she walked within the house grounds, servants exchanging glances whenever the Duke lingered near the stables a little too long. Her closest friend among the kitchen staff, a young woman named Harriet, pulled her aside one afternoon with a worried expression. "People are talking, Eleanor. A duke does not visit the stables every single day without reason." "He cares about his horses," Eleanor answered, though even she heard how weak the excuse sounded. Harriet studied her carefully. "Be careful. Men of his station do not marry stable hands' daughters. If this becomes more than friendship, you will be the one who suffers for it, not him." Eleanor said nothing, but that night she lay awake staring at the ceiling of her small room, torn between the flattering warmth of the Duke's attention and a growing fear of exactly what Harriet had warned her about. Word of the Duke's visits to the stables eventually reached his aunt, Lady Charlotte, who managed much of the household's social affairs. She summoned Edmund to her sitting room one afternoon, her tone sharp with disapproval. "They say you spend your mornings among the stable hands rather than attending to your correspondence," she said, not bothering to hide her irritation. "The Marquis of Belfield has a daughter of marrying age, Edmund. This is the connection your father would have wanted for you, not idle chatter with a groundskeeper's daughter." "Eleanor Hartley saved me from a serious accident," Edmund replied evenly. "I owe her my gratitude, nothing more." Lady Charlotte studied him closely, unconvinced. "Gratitude does not require daily visits. Guard your reputation carefully, nephew. Others are already watching." Meanwhile, Eleanor faced pressure of her own. Her father, though proud of his daughter's skill with horses, grew increasingly uneasy as gossip spread through the village. People are saying foolish things, Eleanor. A duke and a stable hand's daughter. Nothing good comes from such talk. Distance yourself before it becomes a scandal neither of us can undo. Eleanor wanted to argue that nothing improper had occurred, that she and Edmund had shared nothing but honest conversation, yet she understood her father's fear all too well. Reputation, once damaged, rarely recovered in a small community like theirs. The matter came to a head at the annual harvest gathering held on the estate grounds, an event attended by tenants, staff, and members of the local gentry alike. Eleanor attended only briefly, intending to help with the horses used for the evening's activities before slipping away quietly. Instead, as she adjusted the harness on one of the carriage horses, the Duke approached her directly, in full view of the gathered crowd. "Miss Hartley," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "I have not properly thanked you before witnesses for saving my life those weeks ago. Had you not warned me that day, I would not stand here now." A hush fell over the nearby guests. Lady Charlotte's face tightened with visible displeasure from where she stood among the gentry. Eleanor felt every eye in the gathering turned toward her, and for a long moment she could not find her voice. "Anyone would have done the same, Your Grace," she managed finally. "Perhaps," Edmund replied, his gaze steady on hers, "but you were the one who did." Whispers erupted the moment he walked away, some admiring, many scandalized. Eleanor stood frozen amid the murmuring crowd, aware that whatever quiet friendship had existed between them now belonged, whether she wished it or not, to the entire county's gossip. 3 days later, Edmund arrived at the Hartley cottage himself, without servants and without warning, exactly as he had appeared on the road the first time they met. Eleanor's father opened the door and nearly dropped his pipe at the sight of the Duke standing on their humble doorstep. "Your Grace," he stammered, bowing awkwardly, "this is an honor we did not expect." "I have come to speak with your daughter if she will permit it," Edmund said, his tone respectful rather than commanding. Eleanor stepped outside, her heart pounding as she faced him in the fading evening light. "You should not be here. People will talk even more than they already have." "Let them talk," Edmund said simply. "I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who measure their every word around my title. You were the first person who ever spoke to me as though I were simply a man who needed help. I did not know how much I valued that until I nearly lost the chance to hear it again." Eleanor shook her head, though her voice softened. "Your family expects a match befitting your station. I am a stable hand's daughter, Edmund. Nothing changes that fact." "My family expects many things," he replied, "but I have spent enough years living for expectations rather than for myself. I am asking you plainly, without titles or ceremony between us, whether you would consider becoming my wife." For a long moment, Eleanor said nothing, memories of their first meeting rushing back to her, the honesty of that roadside conversation before either of them knew who the other truly was. She thought of Harriet's warnings, her father's fears, and the whispers that had already begun. Yet none of those fears matched the certainty she felt standing before him now. "I would need my father's blessing," she said finally, a small smile breaking through her uncertainty. Her father, who had been listening from the doorway the entire time, stepped forward with tears gathering in his eyes. "You have had it since the moment you walked up our path yourself, Your Grace, rather than sending some servant in your place." Word of their engagement spread through the county far faster than any earlier gossip had managed. Yet this time, the whispers softened into something warmer as the full story became known, how a simple warning on a country road had led to genuine friendship, and eventually to a love neither title nor tradition could prevent. On their wedding day, villagers lined the road leading to the church, the very same road where Eleanor had once shouted a warning to a stranger she never expected to see again. She married not a distant duke hidden behind formality, but the same honest man who had thanked her plainly that first afternoon, saddle loose and pride intact, grateful simply to have been seen for who he truly was.